Hey, welcome back to Great start. Welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. We have for you Chapter 6 of Emily Braun's Book 2. Remember to stop by the coffee, to donate to the VAs and other such things, buy a keychain or a patch or something of the sort, signed book copies, as well as the first Emily Braun's book in the Veil Rider series on Amazon. If you want an invite to the Discord, let me know down below in the comments. Also, remember to comment. We like our comments. We like our feedback. Anywho, onward we go.
Chapter 6, Bile and Sewer Water. The cackling rip of automatic fire was deafening within the cavern, the sound bouncing off the walls like a flock of panicked birds. The two figures on the flesh raft spattered apart as if they were made of corpse paper, splatting wetly to the ground and across the rocky shore behind them. Emily breathed out in short, punctuated roars, her eyes wide as the bodies lay still, little trails of smoke curling from the many holes in their long dead bodies.
I see they don't play fair,
The Torque said into Emily's mind, and even she could feel the look of disgust on its face.
Rather dirty way to go about it, puppeting their corpses like that.
Were they?
Emily thought back to the Torque, and she felt it shake its head within her mind.
Long dead, but were alive enough to do his bidding. Don't look at it as if you killed them. Look at it as you cutting away their leash and letting them finally rest.
Emily stepped forward, slowly, her ears ringing as she looked down at the bodies of both her mother and father. It was them. She knew it was, but she just never really wanted to know if they were alive or not. She assumed they were, as they never bothered to call her the entire time, but the long stretch of silence had left it to the imagination. In her mind, Emily thought they had just left, leaving her behind for one of the new worlds or finding a fresh start elsewhere. To know they were here, attached to one of these? Emily's shoulders heaved and buckled as she turned and vomited over the side of the flesh raft, falling down to her knees and resting on her rifle as she planted the buttstock. She couldn't even feel the heat of the barrel burn in her hand as she convulsed and vomited again, the salt water splashing and filling the cavern with its echo. A hand from the raft reached up, but instead of grasping at her or pulling her, it instead held her long braid away from her face. The eye and partially hidden face of an older man looking up at her kindly. Emily spat down into the water, heaved in a breath, then looked over at the older man's half-buried face, nodding to it.
Thank you, sir.
The eye smiled, crinkling at the corners with old laugh lines, and the hand gave her a soft pat on her shoulder.
I guess there's still some humanity left in the rafts,
Oscar said, and he looked back at the long line of rafts they had already crossed.
I don't know if that makes it better or so much worse.
Gale swallowed hard, checking her canteens for any that still held water.
Worse. It makes it worse. These things are damn near impossible to kill unless you pour fuel on them the entire time and set them on fire, which they must feel as they burn.
Emily looked down at the crinkled eye, still smiling at her, and she gave the dirty hand a soft pat.
Sorry, old-timer. Wish I could help.
The hand gave her own a soft squeeze, then let her go, the old eye closing as if telling her it was time to move on and leave him there.
I have a few dribbles of water left, Emily.
Gale said, handing the canteen towards Emily. Emily set her mouth, took the canteen, and swigged the little dregs of water. She swished it around her mouth a few times, then spat it out.
Let's go.
Emily said, stepping over the still smoking bodies of her parents and grinding her boot heel into the loose stone floor. Dexter set Humir down on the tunnel floor as everyone else stepped off the last raft, setting their faces as they looked down the long opening in the cavern wall.
No lights again,
Bogart said, spitting on the ground. Dale nodded.
Lights give people hope. The more darkness that surrounds them, the more their soul decays.
Rather dour, darling.
Katja said with a frown.
You have to keep things upbeat. Remember?
Humir shook her head, the silver caps on her ears catching the light from their lamps and flashlights.
He is right. No hope here, no light. Just darkness and the shadows.
Fucking hell, people. Keep it together.
Oscar chided at them, though he looked as nervous as the rest of them. Emily stepped off down the tunnel, her face set. Marill and Davin were close at her side, and everyone else quickly fell into step.
Tight corridors makes it more defensible.
Davin said to himself, slowly working his flashlight around the oddly smooth cavern opening. Marill hefted her snub-nosed M2 and kept it trained ahead of her, the laser beam from her sight suit visible in the dust.
We'll have the firepower. All we have to do is keep whatever's coming for us in this tunnel.
Emily gazed down at the tunnel floor as it opened up ahead of them, and she grimaced as she saw 3 pairs of larger, deep prints that crushed the stone to shape.
His friends were here. Let's hope they're still here.
Marill muttered, sweeping her heavy machine gun from side to side. The tunnel continued on, angling upwards and as sweltering as the last, but much to their fears it began to widen, becoming more and more refined the further on they went.
What is this place?
Oscar said in a hushed tone, eyes wide as he cast his flashlight onto a stone bench insert into the opening cavern wall. Humir looked around her, though her eyes were narrowed as she searched for a target.
This feels like a temple, or a long-forgotten place of power.
Maybe this is the part where the beholder pops out of the darkness.
Bogart whispered to Dexter. Dexter smiled but shot an angry look to Bogart.
Read the cavern, Bogart.
Katja slowed to a stop, looking down and tracing her flashlight along the floor.
Stone is cut neatly here, and I noticed we've been going up for quite a ways towards the surface. Plus, I think there's something here.
What do you mean, darling?
Dale said, leaning over and looking where she was.
I don't see anything here.
Look, there's an old engraving here.
Katja said while kneeling down, digging her finger into the dust and finding a groove.
And it's very smooth, almost like it was cut up by a laser.
Humir looked down at where Katja was slowly digging dirt free, then reached up and grabbed onto one of her silver ear caps.
Ask a litter.
Humir hissed, and as she did, a huge boom of air cascaded along the ground, ripping dust away from the floor in a huge plume.
Holy shit.
Marill whispered, her eyes wide as half of the floor was now clean and exposed. Emily casted her flashlight along the cavern, and half of a titanic, intricate summoning circle was on the floor. The lines so varied in thickness that it would have passed as a masterwork of art. Circles intertwined with triangles, octagons, and some shapes that Emily nor any of the others had seen before. Inset along these shapes, words had been carved, impossibly smooth and devoid of imperfection, and lines danced around the shapes, combining them or working around them as the language continued along it.
Summoning circle?
Marill offered, blinking down at the lines and shapes. Emily looked left and right at the circle, blinking in confusion, but her eyes widened as she began to realize what all the little lines were making. She stepped forward, held out her rifle, then began to slowly trace along the ground, her muzzle brake easily winding its way through the dust that filled the grooves. After a moment, Emily was done, and she looked down at the giant teardrop head of the architect, around which sat a band with 2 circles adorning it near the center.
Curious.
The Torque said, but offered nothing more as Emily heard something from further down on the opposite side of the giant room. Everyone's rifles popped up in a flash, and Emily slowly began to walk forward, sweat dripping from her nose and braid as everyone quickly formed up behind her. The piled up dust under their boots crunched with the same muffled noise of fresh snow, and as they slowly walked forward, the sound began to grow stronger, little by little. Emily realized that everyone else was breathing heavily around her, and even Humir's breath was haggard, coming out in little hiccups and shaken with panic. Then Emily recognized what sound they were following, and that someone down the cavernous tunnel was whistling.
Is that? There's no way.
Oscar said with a shudder, his knuckles white as he gripped his heavily modified FAL. Dale nodded, his own hands holding a tight, close-handed grip on his M4.
That's the whistle. Someone is whistling the same song as the killer in Twisted Nerve.
The sound was loud, despite the distance, filling their ears with its lyrical, haunting tone. Emily knew who was whistling, or who might be carefree enough to whistle this far down underground, and she knew it wasn't the friends of the long-dead armored man. Even more so, she hated that he was a really, really good whistler. Humir hissed out her teeth as tears began to well in her eyes, and even Marill seemed to be having trouble, her throat bobbing as she swallowed.
Steady on,
Davin said, and took point, Emily close on his shoulder as the rest of them fell in. The whistling grew louder as they covered the distance. The air was so hot and thick that it could almost choke as it was breathed in. Worse than the temperature or the whistle was the darkness, so deep and pitched that their flashlights barely broke 10 feet past their boots. Emily looked over her shoulder, her other hand tight on the back of Davin's belt. Humir was silently crying, choking out terrified sobs as she looked around with her purple-red eyes. Marill was crying as well, but she was able to master herself, ears alert and shoulders hunched. Dale and Katja were so close together that their shoulders were touching the entire time, while Oscar, Gale, Dexter, and Bogart had their faces steeled, eyes narrowed to what was ahead of them. They were holding steady, all the way up until the smell sucker punched them in the nose. The reeking, fetid scent of putrid meat, sweat, and organs open to the air hit them all at once, and it was so bad Emily opened her mouth in a flinch as if she had been physically assaulted by it. Humir folded immediately, bending over her Scar L and vomiting wetly against the floor, though she was so parched that only a small trail of bile hit the stone. Marill managed to only vomit once, her eyes so wide with fear that Emily was afraid that she was going to bolt and run. She didn't, but Emily knew it was a close thing. Everyone else grimaced or swallowed thickly as they struggled to keep their stomachs in control, but they all snapped their heads up when the whistling stopped. Warm, soft, pink light was building at the end of the tunnel, and a male voice had taken up the place of the whistling.
Where the willow bends and scrapes its knees.
The voice sang, soft and curling in the putrid air. Emily's skin prickled with goosebumps and her hair stood up on end. The voice was wrong, so wrong for where they were, for what they were smelling. The voice was that of a father singing over his children, a lullaby to ease the mind and relax the thoughts. But here, in this tunnel, this far underground, it was like someone was singing a cradle song in hell to the damned.
The wind blows through us and scatters souls like the leaves.
The voice crooned out again, and Emily could just make out the dull, subtle sound of a knife's edge dragging through something. Emily forced her foot forward, blinking at the sweat trying to crawl into her eyes, and Davin stepped beside her. The smell of blood thickened as they stalked forward. Humir breathing through her teeth while Marill managed to steel herself as well as the humans, panting through her nose. The tunnel started opening up into another cavern, though it was so well carved and designed it may as well had been a room of some sort. Emily heard a quiet splash on one of her steps, her foot sinking down as if she had gone down a step, and glanced down as the light grew. The floor was nothing but a lake of blood, so thick and deep that it covered the toe of her boot right up to her laces. The light was bright enough here that it allowed Emily to see ahead of them without their flashlights. Someone had put up a long, elegant drape of some sort, blocking the rest of the room from view. It was thin, partially see-through, and something was moving within the other side of the room. The drape was made of multiple, long, wide strips of whatever material it was, and didn't move or flutter as its ends rested down in the blood. The voice was just humming now, arms lifting something massive and tilting it back and forth. Emily judged that from the voice and silhouette, it must not have been a large man, or thickly muscled for that matter. She looked around the now lit room, saw the chunks of stone that had been blasted from the walls, and understood that the other massive men had both succeeded and failed in their mission to beat her here. Emily turned off her flashlight, and within breaths, everyone else had done the same. Davin went to take a step, stopped, then reached down through the thick layer of blood. When he brought his crimson-covered hand back up, he had a small string of rather large-looking grenades clutched in his fist, and he furrowed his eyes down at them.
I'll keep these,
Davin whispered, and quickly fastened them to his belt. Emily looked over her shoulder, saw that everyone was more or less ready to go, then stepped forward herself, pushing out the barrel of her Bren rifle to gently move aside one of the strands. The sound of the man's humming hit her in the ears afresh, deep and echoing, as all the smells were just as worse, just as strong, just as wrong. Emily blinked as the light was far more intense here, though where it was coming from she did not know. She stepped forward as quietly as she could, but when her eyes adjusted to the brightness, her voice caught in her throat and she startled backwards into Marill, splashing loudly with her boots. The man raised his head, cocked it, then half turned, looking over his shoulder with absolute surprise.
Well, I'll be. I didn't even feel you come in here. Must be quite the sneaky lot, you gang.
Emily panned her head around the room as everyone else did the same, and she pressed hard against Marill to keep herself standing. The room itself was tall, absurdly tall, and all the perfectly cut stone was instead covered from edge to edge to edge in pink, raw flesh. Deep blue veins just visible near the surface. Hanging in neat, tidy rows and columns on the flesh were thousands of people of all kinds, all races, and all dimensions. They hung like unsupported puppets from the walls, only held aloft by thick, gleaming spines of bone that sank into their bodies just above the bottom of their spine. Their limbs and heads hung lamely, but Emily could see them all breathing, eyes wide open and staring into the room. They drew in ragged, pained breaths as if they were trying their best to suppress the urge to scream. Emily threw her eyes left and right, hands clenching her rifle, and she saw a familiar face. A Caine that looked just like Maeve. The Caine was bowed over like the rest, though his mountain spine was near the ground, and under his feet lay multiple pieces of thick, advanced armor that had been torn and rended apart. Emily recognized those as well.
Do you like them?
The man said, and Emily slashed her eyes to him, still pressed against the back of Marill's shaken equine chest. He was slight of build, fair-faced, and wearing clothes that would have been better fitting in a Victorian medical theater. White, creamy sleeves were rolled up above the elbow, while atop the shirt he wore a charming, understated vest with crawling ivy. His pants were plain, expertly clean, and his brown leather shoes sat atop the blood, unlike Emily's boots. Matching his gray eyes was ashen brown hair, cut close at the sides and arranged in a fringe. His lips were thin and smiling at Emily. It made the whole thing somehow worse.
I see you are taken aback,
he said, exhaling proudly and gesturing around him, an odd shimmering blade in his left hand.
Works of art. All of them.
He waited for Emily to say something, and when she didn't, he flashed his palms in a dismissive gesture.
I see my sister did not tell you about me. No matter. I'm sure you know my name already, don't you?
The flesh tailor said, giving her a polite bow. Emily nodded and saw the Caine jerk a little when she spoke.
Yes, the flesh tailor.
Sounds better in my language, but I doubt you could understand it,
he said, chuckling smugly.
As it is, you are very clever. The changer will be quite put out you didn't come to the lake. I told him he was trying too hard, but he wouldn't have it. Always had a penchant for the dramatic.
Neither Emily or the others spoke, while the Caine slowly raised his head just a scant couple of inches, locking his eyes onto Emily. The flesh tailor clicked his teeth.
Not very talkative, are you? You're kind of ruining this, you know. How am I supposed to talk about myself if you don't ask any questions?
Emily looked towards the Caine and saw that Tavin was mouthing words to her, and his fingers were doing an odd little twitch. Emily swallowed, then looked towards the flesh tailor, doing her best to keep her voice from croaking.
Where are the armored men?
Ah! She speaks,
he said happily, smiling brightly at Emily.
You mean the large lads in the fancy armor. They're right here.
He stepped to the side, and Emily was startled to recognize that she had been looking at them the entire time. They had been skinned and had been blending into the background, their bodies laying out on a large stone dais just behind the flesh tailor.
Fascinating, in a crude way, really. Augmented flesh and organs, built-in steroid injectors, someone messing with and ruining my work,
he said, lifting a large heart into his hand.
I made you humans in just the right way.
And here you lot are messing with things you have no right to, tampering with my perfections.
The continued silence permeated the room, though the flesh tailor saw far different expressions on their faces. He grinned vilely.
What? She hasn't told you? Has my sister really not told you anything about us? About you?
Emily swallowed again, but flicked her eyes back to Tavin as he started to fully come awake, still mouthing words to her.
She sent you after her title and her focal, yet didn't tell you anything?
He said, then barked out a laugh.
Why am I not surprised? All she ever does is keep secrets. I mean, I'm her own brother, and she didn't tell me she was escaping off with our food.
Emily.
Marill whined quietly, her voice barely above a strained whisper.
Then you come all the way down here with, what, your friends? Careless you are, so very careless.
The flesh tailor murmured to Emily, gesturing at everyone behind her with his long, elegant, alien blade.
Or maybe you just don't care about what happens to them. Would surely fit into theme with my sister, I'll tell you that. You have absolutely no way to hurt me, no way to wound me, yet you still came down here. So arrogant.
Emily heard a choking noise, then a thick, heavy splash as Humir fainted down into the blood. Thankfully, Dexter noticed and knelt down, turning her over onto her back so she wouldn't drown.
Dear me.
The flesh tailor chuckled, setting down the massive heart.
You do choose poorly. An elf, all the way down here, near me? Has no one taught you anything?
He's controlling the situation. Catch him off guard or we're all dead.
The torque said into Emily's mind, then it powered down immediately. The flesh tailor's head tilted, and he turned, looking around the room.
What was that?
The crown.
Emily said, taking a step forward and causing the blood to ripple towards the flesh tailor.
Where is it?
The flesh tailor pursed his lips, clearly disappointed with the lack of both banter and questions that pertained to him or his goings-on.
Really? Right to the crown? Are you not going to ask about why all the bodies are hung up here? Or what I'm doing? Or who you—
Where is the fucking crown?
Emily screeched, ripping her rifle up to her shoulder and putting the flesh tailor's head in her sights.
I don't give a fuck about you or what you're doing. Where is the fucking crown?
Everyone else reacted intuitively, raising their weapons and training them on the flesh tailor.
In me.
The flesh tailor said in a bored tone.
Which means you're never going to get it unless we cut a deal. You have to ask me for something in return. Like if I'm going to let the boy go, or bring your parents back. Or if I give you the crown, you tell me where my sister is. Or—
His voice was cut short as Emily pulled back on the trigger, sending a 5.56 green tip zipping towards the flesh tailor's forehead. The lead hit square in between his eyes, but he didn't even budge, and the flattened lead and steel fell away with a quaint plop into the blood.
Or not.
The flesh tailor said with an annoyed squint, and then he snapped his fingers.
I'll speak with you when you are well in hand, then.
All of the bodies along the wall jerked upright as if someone yanked on their puppet strings, and even Tavin's head snapped up, his eyes wide.
I expected a little more of you. Turns out, you're just rather boring.
The flesh tailor said disappointedly, then waved his hand in the air towards Emily.
Kill her friends, then bring her to me.
One by one, the bodies lurched off of the spines that held them in place, landing with great splashes of crimson as they hit the ground, standing back upright and advancing on Emily and her group without pause. Marill screamed, holding up her snub-nosed M2 and letting rip a cascade of rounds towards the closest group of awakened wall ornaments, cutting them down and blowing away chunks of pristine, perfected flesh. At once, the rest of the group opened up, Davin, Oscar, and Gale cutting left while Dale, Bogart, and Marill cut right. Katja stayed kneeling down next to Humir, snapping off accurate fire with her glial. Emily, not knowing what else to do, pulled out the broken back sayax and the tiger talon, advancing on the flesh tailor with bared teeth. Whether she liked it or not, she had to get that crown out, somehow. He, however, just laughed, tucking his hands into his vest pockets.
Oh, really now? Do you think you can hurt me? You're a human. You were formed and consumed for years by my kind. What could you possibly do to me?
For some reason, this incensed Emily. She felt her anger rise up in her throat in a growl, and she launched herself towards the dandy brother of the architect, snarling as she lashed out with the sayax. Unlike the previous attempts, the flesh tailor did not freeze when he blocked the sayax with his own glittering alien blade.
Pitiful.
The flesh tailor purred out to Emily, then swiftly jerked his blade away and backhanded her across the face with an ear-splitting crack, cutting open her lip and throwing her down across the pool of thick blood. Emily screeched out in pain as she rolled along the surface of the blood, and it felt like she was landing on concrete.
Something happened.
The Torque shouted in alarm, flooding power into Emily's face, and something else batted it away just as quickly. Emily's head buzzed and her eyes sparkled with light as she raised herself up from the pool of blood, watching in befuddled confusion as she realized she was floating on the surface the same way the flesh tailor was.
What is happening?
Emily wheezed out, looking over her shoulder at the flesh tailor. His face was a mask of both confusion and incredulity, looking at Emily as if she had suddenly grown wings and 7 heads.
This. What is the meaning of this?
He spat, advancing on Emily as his face twisted in rage.
What has she done?
As the gunfire roared around her, Emily rolled to her side and away from the flesh tailor, skittering up onto her feet and sprinting a few paces away to get space. Bodies were slamming down onto the lake of blood at a faster pace, and they were dropping not nearly quick enough, the sound deafening as the rifles and machine guns of her party roared and boomed in the closed space.
What have you done?
The flesh tailor bellowed at Emily as he continued advancing on her, swiping his blade from side to side in a flourish.
What has my sister done to you? Run, 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 run.
The Torque called out into her head.
Something turned on inside of you, but it's not going to last forever. We need to get inside of him.
Inside of him?
Emily roared to the Torque in her mind as she got to her feet, bringing her weapons up into a guard.
The fuck do you mean I need to get inside of him?
You heard the little godly prat. The crown is inside of him, and your friends are not going to last long. Hurry, Emily.
The Torque screamed, and soon after, the war howls of Bogart echoed over the gunfire.
Bogart!
Dexter screamed over the din, mowing down several people who were coming for him after landing in the blood. Bogart had been grabbed from behind, a large human man having come down too close to kill and was fumbling with something at his own belt.
Let go, you son of a bitch!
Bogart howled, holding down the trigger of his automatic rifle as it spat lead into the group of bodies in front of him.
Dexter, get him off of me!
I can't get a good shot. You have to turn.
Dexter called back to his brother, swinging his body left and right to try and get his sights on target through the growing mass of bodies. With a cry of outrage, Bogart arched his back, a spine-like dagger having been punched through the back of his right rib cage.
You piece of piss!
Bogart howled, pulling his own dagger from his boot and shoving it skyward, piercing the bottom of the man's jaw and shoving the steel into his brain. Bogart turned, breathing out raggedly while his rifle hung empty at his side, the spine dagger still lodged in his lung.
Dexter, brother! I need a medic bag!
Dexter shoulder-checked a woman out of his way as he tried to get to his brother, calling out to Bogart in a panic.
Behind you!
Ah!
Bogart roared out in pain as a small boy slammed another spine dagger into his hamstring. Bogart came down hard onto his knee, leaning backwards with another scream as a man dressed in his Sunday best punched another spine dagger down onto Bogart's neck. He was dragged down to the blood by a woman wearing the clothes of a schoolteacher, her name badge still bearing smiling stickers and the name Mrs. Honeysuckle. Mrs. Honeysuckle had only one lesson to teach here in this room, and both she and the man held Bogart's head face down into the blood, both patiently waiting for the thick bubbles to stop.
They're cutting her off!
Katja called out, firing deftly with her Gale as Oscar screamed, having been sliced across the neck by an elf wielding another spine knife.
They're cutting off Emily!
Gale ran backwards, splashing across the ground and standing next to Katja.
Emily, they're pushing us back. Oscar, can you get to her?
No.
Oscar panted out in a scream, running back while holding his neck.
Bogart!
Dexter howled again, slamming down anyone too close with the buttstock of his rifle and then finishing them off with his pistol.
Bogart! Bogart!
Dale fell backwards with a splash as a thrown bone knife embedded itself into his collarbone, screeching in pain. Emily saw the writing on the wall as Marill began to steadily fall back, her snub-nosed M2 thudding away and her casings leaving a trail to mark her path. Emily rounded on the flesh tailor, screaming like a banshee as she collided into him, their blades flashing brightly as he parried everything she threw at him. She tried to kick, bite, and stab at the flesh tailor, but the man just seemed to know everything she was going to do, right before her brain even kicked her nerves into action. He backhanded her again, and she slipped and tumbled onto the blood, though instead of splashing into it, she slid and rolled across it with an animalistic snarl. As she was rolling, she saw something out of place at the top of the tall, towering room.
I can't do anything.
The torque screamed into Emily's head, its voice ringed with uncontained panic.
I'm barely able to funnel any of my power into you. Something is blocking me.
Emily, we can't see you.
Marill wailed, and Emily ducked her head as specialized 50 caliber rounds snapped overhead, bouncing pitifully off the flesh tailor and plopping into the blood pool.
We're getting pushed back.
Oscar's voice rung above the din, his voice ringed with fear.
Grab Humir! They're going to get her!
I got her! I got her! Keep moving!
Katja screamed, her voice strained as if she was dragging dead weight.
I can't see Bogart!
Dexter howled, and Emily could hear him still beating people to death with his rifle. Emily raised her head as she got to her knees, squinting past the blood that was trickling in from the new cut in her eyebrow, and saw Bogart laying face down in the blood pool, his arms splayed out and legs turned underneath each other as he died mid-struggle.
I can't give you any more power, but I can still talk to you. Get up. Get up, Emily.
The torque whispered to her, and it was so close it almost felt like it was in her ears. Emily grunted, pulling her knees under her as she heard the calm, patient steps of the flesh tailor behind her. She tilted her head skywards, remembering what she had seen briefly as she was rolling across the surface of the blood, then cast her eyes back down to Bogart's body.
So I did hear something. What's that you got in that necklace, Hoyden?
He said, stopping just behind Emily as she shakily got to her feet.
It almost feels like as you frinked, but they should be nowhere near here. Not this rock. Emily, you're on your own. Act without thinking. Think without acting.
The torque whispered again. Then she heard it howl in aggravation as it was suppressed by something else. Something alien yet all too familiar. Emily stood but stayed facing towards Bogart's body, using it as a catalyst to fill her mind as the gunfire intensified.
Stop this. I want to make a deal.
I was hoping so,
the flesh tailor said, and Emily hated that she could hear the smile on his lips.
They'll be running out of ammunition here soon.
Call off your people, and I want mine next to me. Then we'll talk,
Emily said in a low tone, still staring at Bogart.
I don't want anyone else to die.
She heard his fingers snap, and all the bodies stopped moving, some even lurching to a halt halfway off their wall spines.
Tavin, bring them here,
the flesh tailor said, and Emily heard the splashing of bodies parting. Emily's skin crawled as she felt the flesh tailor walk behind her and place a hand on her shoulder, and she had to fight the urge to rip her body away from his grasp.
There's a good human. Let's talk this out. No need for anyone else to die needlessly. Here's Tavin.
The flesh tailor purred, turning and smiling at the Cottercanuck who walked in front of Davern and the rest. Emily flicked her eyes towards her group for only a second, and saw she acted with only seconds to spare, as all of their magazines were spent, and even Marill had a void on her feed belt, likely only a few more seconds of ammunition. All of them had suffered more wounds as well, slices and open cuts visible through their clothing and gear. Davin was the worst of them, having tanked 4 of the spine daggers along his body, and one looked really close to his heart. Davin, however, was still clutching the grenades, and she caught his gaze. Emily looked up towards the ceiling, to the grenades, then back to Bogart.
So,
the flesh tailor said, still resting his hand on Emily's shoulder and turning towards the rest of the group.
I think it's quite evident I hold all the cards here. My flesh rafts will grab onto you and not let you go if you somehow got away, and you never had enough ammunition to stop all of my little perfections.
He held out his free hand, palm up, and moved it in front of him in an enveloping gesture.
So let's make a deal. I'll give you the crown in exchange for just a few simple items. No harm, no foul. I won't take it personally that you not only ruined some of my creations, but also shot me a few times. I think you even marred my vest, young lady.
The flesh tailor tilted his head towards Marill, who was doing everything she could not to look him in the eye, while Humir woke up, screamed in horror, then passed back out in Katja's arms. The flesh tailor just chuckled.
Poor things. Some of you, like the centaur, can handle our presence, but others cannot. I'm honestly surprised she could walk down here. Unlike you humans, who can look me right in the eye,
he said with haughty disgust, and his face soured.
Impudent little worms.
The deal?
Emily said, still focusing her mind on Bogart and letting his death fill it. The flesh tailor gave her shoulder a squeeze.
Yes, the deal. I give you the crown,
But you serve me, not my arrogant little sister, and you tell me where the little traitor is hiding. Also, you have to pick 2 of your group to replace all my little creations you've ruined.
Davin and Marill.
Emily said without pause, and the shocked gasp from the group did not surprise her. As the Flesh Tailor laughed in delight, she kept her mind focused on Bogart, focused on death, focused on anything but what she wanted to do.
Not even a pause or hesitation.
The Flesh Tailor cried out with delight, gesturing towards the group who stood stunned, and even Tavin seemed as taken aback as he could be.
Come, step forth.
Davin and Marill looked to each other, but slowly stepped towards Emily and the Flesh Tailor as they stood atop the surface of the blood, their boots rippling the surface in waves.
Emily? Really?
Marill mewled, her horsey ears back and tears already falling down her cheek.
Me? But I thought...
Davin jerked his head towards Emily, his fingers still gripping all of the pull rings of the grenades as he stood stalwart despite his wounds.
Anything to complete the mission, Emily.
We're this close to washing our fucking hands of this shit.
Emily growled, still staring at Bogart's body, though she then cast her eyes skyward.
Being rid of this task.
Davin flicked his eyes up, as if rolling them, but whipped them back towards Emily when he saw what she was looking at. He nodded as he spoke.
There will always be more missions in the pipeline, especially if you're working for this dandy fuck.
Not if I can help it.
Emily growled while Marill came to a halt a few feet away.
We're friends, Emily.
She cried out, reaching out her free hand while the other held the handle of her snub-nosed M2.
You said so. You said you cared about me.
Emily kept her eyes focused, her mind focused, keeping Marill's words from affecting her.
You're just another cog in the machine like me. Another pawn in the game.
Emily said derisively, and Marill choked out in a shocked whimper. The Flesh Tailor was beaming and even began to chuckle.
Why the true creations even trifle with humans is a mystery to me. But I have to say, I do love the drama of all this.
He breathed in deeply, as if savoring the air.
Delicious emotions. And humans can make them all so much more delightful.
Marill's knees buckled with a splash as she came down in front of Emily, both her hands grabbing onto Emily's thighs and letting the barrel of her weapon dip down into the blood.
Emily, look at me. Look at me.
Emily flicked her eyes down towards Marill and instead focused on her face, her blood-stained hair braid, the tears and snot running down her face as she hiccuped.
How could you do this to me? After all we've been through? After all we've done?
Marill wailed, her entire body shaking.
I thought you loved.
Emily felt both of the Flesh Tailor's hands now resting on her shoulders as he looked over her head. Her fingers rolled along the handle of the tiger talon, her muscles cool but coiled. He was too close now. No room for escape. The Flesh Tailor clicked his teeth and made a pitiful sound towards Marill.
Oh, how touching. I think I'll make her one of my messengers, like Tavin. Keep her just like this.
He sputtered and coughed out in surprise as Emily raised her arm and punched the tiger talon through the bottom of his sternum. Her eyes locked onto Marill's as she let the centaurus's grief and heartbreak fill her mind and hide her own thoughts. The Flesh Tailor looked down, eyes wide in shock and surprise as the horrifying realization dawned on him.
No. What? How?
I do love you, Marill.
Emily said with a smile.
I love all my friends.
which is why I hope this works.
This is impossible!
The flesh tailor screamed, still in such shock he didn't do much but look down past his arms at the blade buried in his chest.
I am of the Agra Nocta!
The people around them all lurched into action, whipping out spine knives and raising them as they moved. Emily pushed down on the tiger talon and dropped forcefully to her knee, ripping the blade through the flesh tailor's groin. Davin ripped the rings from the grenades, leaning back to prepare the throw as the spoons all clanged away from their retentions.
Everybody down!
Time slowed down to a crawl for Emily as she looked up, organs spilling out onto her arm and back as they fell away from the flesh tailor. First, she saw Marill, eyes wide with a second slap of shock as they were almost face to face, and she was reaching out towards Emily as if to catch her. Next, she saw Davin, coiling his arm muscles, the grenades tinkling merrily as he took aim at the exposed bottom of the ancient pipe, having been revealed by the expanding ceiling growing with the task of the flesh tailor's servants. She moved her head to see the rest of her group diving towards her, faces contorted in panic, while Davin simply smiled at her, holding up a hand in goodbye. Davin roared defiantly as 2 more spine daggers were dug into his body, but this did not slow his arm, nor did it stray his aim. The grenades flew through the air in a jaunty tumble, cartwheeling together towards the pipe.
Say hello to me,
Davin said into her mind, echoing as the grenades slammed against the pipe, eliciting a mournful clong from the old flesh-covered metal.
I will.
Emily said back to him, then reached down, grabbing a simple silver circlet she spied falling out with the flesh tailor's organs.
I'm sorry.
Don't be.
Davin thought back to her, then he smiled as the grenades detonated, filling the ceiling of the chamber with fire, smoke, and raining stone.
Come on, Kiska. Just try it.
Klindagi said, holding a spoonful of caviar towards the man across from her at the little round patio table, the wind catching her light gray fur. Cole shrugged his head away from the spoon, grimacing.
Babe, come on. You know I don't eat that shit.
Klindagi pouted, pushing out her feline bottom lip.
How do you know if you never try?
The two had been dating for only a few months, the human Cole meeting the Esperanto Klindagi while out on a dive. Esperantos were a felid race that, while humanoid, still bore a lot of feline features. Crossing over during a rather long tether after a crack storm, Esperantos flooded onto Earth as they themselves were fleeing a war, injecting roughly 5,000 of their kind onto Earth before their plane of existence untethered. Tall, proud, and warrior-like, the Esperanto were met with mixed emotions, as many called them furries and refused to even allow them into buildings within some cities. However, over the next few months, Esperantos showed the world they were not savages and quickly adapted to human culture, their survival drive making it an almost seamless transition. While the Esperanto were attractive in their own way, many found it difficult to work past the fur or muzzle, though some, like Cole, found them fascinating in their own way.
I'm not trying it because I don't like it. I won't eat sushi and I won't eat this,
Cole said, crossing his arms over each other. Klindagi moved the spoon in a little circle.
Come, Kiska. Eat this for Klindagi, and maybe she will do something for you later.
Cole raised a brow in suspicion, but the offer did pique his curiosity.
Like what? And don't say take a bath together. I'm gonna get a bill for that drain, I just know it.
Klindagi laughed airily, waggling the spoon.
No bath.
Cole unfolded his arms with a roll of his eyes and leaned forward across the table, opening his mouth. Klindagi grinned with a flash of her canines, but as she leaned forward to place the spoon into Cole's mouth, she felt something tremor below her feet. She pricked her ears up, swiveling them back and forth as her tail perked up as well.
Babe, you alright?
Cole asked her, his brows furrowing with worry.
Whoa, wait. Do you feel that?
Klindagi turned, looking around behind her as she set down the caviar-laden spoon.
Ground is shaking. You feel it too, Kiska.
Everyone else in the cafe was looking around in confusion as well, their silverware and plates beginning to rattle and clink against the tabletops. Vehicles on the main road that ran through the strip all came to a halt, leaning out their windows in alarm as buildings around Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo Road began to rattle in earnest. A window broke apart and people began to scream. The entire wall of a nearby hotel shuddered, all of its windows shattering and raining glass shards down to the sidewalk. Then cracks started spidering along the roadway, cracking apart the blacktop. Chunks of buildings slammed down into a nearby fountain, eliciting a great splash of water that rained down onto everyone around it who was running for their lives.
Klindagi, move!
Cole barked, grabbing the Esperanto by her hand and jerking her away towards the opposite side of the street. They made it 10 strides before the entire intersection buckled in on itself with a cascading groan and crumble of the earth, then exploded outward with a flash of light. Cole covered Klindagi's ears with his hands as she fell on top of him, burrowing one side of his face into her back to dampen the sound. The blast wave that followed was deafening, throwing Cole, Klindagi, and everyone else who was too close down onto their backs as crags of concrete, asphalt, pipe, and compacted dirt were thrown through the air by the shockwave. People screamed as they fell, or their screams were cut short as debris pounded them into the ground, running for cover or crawling away towards whatever shelter that had been nearby. Cars and trucks that had been too slow to back up were thrown through the air with the explosion, some landing safely in the deep fountains, while others crunched down into buildings or the road, crushing their occupants or letting them off with only a light maiming. Klindagi raised her head up as the sounds of fallen rubble slackened, and she peeked over the edge of a stone flower garden, ears perked and still swiveling. She saw that water was flooding into the hole from multiple water pipes, and she got up, still listening.
Kiska, someone is down there,
Klindagi said in an aloof tone, eyes wide with the excitement of it all. Cole groaned and rolled up onto his knees, having cushioned Klindagi's fall with his body, though not by choice.
You hear someone, babe? The thing fucking exploded!
Klindagi shook her head from side to side, blinking.
No, Kiska, someone is down there. There is a woman screaming.
Cole jerked himself up with the help of the flower garden, and despite one of his ears ringing painfully, he could actually hear someone yelling for help from within the hole. It was faint, almost drowned out by the sound of rushing water and a natural gas line currently burning and throwing spirals of flame and smoke into the air.
Sounds like an elf.
Cole murmured, standing up and then helping Klindagi to her feet. The two jogged over towards the ragged sinkhole, Klindagi's tail swishing back and forth behind her, and they leaned down over the side, blinking into the darkness.
Smells like a sewer line got bursted,
Cole said, wrinkling his nose, and others also appeared around the hole, while around them security from the hotels and casinos were running out to help the wounded. Klindagi raised her brows.
Yes, sewer. Also blood.
Blood?
A man asked next to them, looking to the Esperanto in alarm.
What do you mean, blood?
Everyone looked back down the hole as the sound of rushing water grew, as well as the screams of multiple people down in the darkness.
Water coming,
Klindagi said in alarm, her ears still perked, and she staggered backwards.
Water coming, and blood. Away, Kiska!
Cole stepped backwards towards her as the thundering rush of water grew with the volume of the struggling screams. A second wave of screams and running erupted when a great gout of sewer water and blood exploded from the sinkhole, throwing ichor yellow water out onto the street. The screams from within the tunnel were replaced by the impacts of bodies, and as the water receded and flowed down the intact parts of the streets, Klindagi surged forward again, her boots splacking in the stomach churning water.
Kiska, there are wounded!
Klindagi said, pointing to multiple twisting or twitching figures now laying on the street.
And the centaur is here.
Cole blanched as he saw the centauress lean up and then crash back down to the asphalt.
A centaur? What in the fuck?
He ran over and started helping Klendagi check the bodies. Many of them were dead, at least 10 of them, and they were all missing body parts in one way or another. An elf with silver ear caps was barely breathing, her body bruised, battered, and her face covered in multiple deep scratches. A gaggle of humans in tactical gear were spread out in a wave from each other, all but one, moaning and trying to stand. The one not moving had what seemed like dozens of knives made from bone stuck in his body, and he lay face down on the partially destroyed road, unmoving, and multiple rings from grenades were laced around his fingers. Klendagi, however, saw one human in particular fall away from the arms of the centaur, landing with a wet smack onto the street and coughing up a lungful of the foul liquid. As Klendagi squatted down and rested on her knees, she reached out with a hand and lifted the grimy, blood and waste-soaked braid of the woman, leaning down to look at her face. She smiled brightly with her canines, tilting her head in recognition.
Hello there, Emily Bronze.